Linda Brooks, a woman who had dedicated her life to rising from a young nurse to a respected medical director, always believed that true leadership was about actions, not titles. On a seemingly ordinary day, she chose to wear the simple nurse's scrubs, ready to step in wherever her team needed her. But on this very day, Linda would encounter an arrogant doctor who saw her as just another nurse, unaware of her true position. This story is more than just a lesson in rank. It's a powerful reminder of humility, respect, and the strength that comes from quiet resilience. Bookmark. If you think this story was good, comment 1. If you think it was amazing, comment 2. And let us know if you've had similar experiences. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss more inspiring stories like this. Share your thoughts about this story in the comments below. Linda Brooks always prided herself on her humility and dedication. In her early 40s, she had risen from humble beginnings to become the medical director of one of the city's premier hospitals. Although she held a prestigious title, Linda still valued the simple, grounding experiences of everyday medical work. She believed that true leadership came from understanding every role within a hospital, no matter how big or small. So, when a colleague needed her to step into a nursing role temporarily, she gladly donned her scrubs and went to work without hesitation. Linda's life journey had been anything but easy. Growing up in a struggling neighborhood, opportunities for success seemed scarce, yet she never let her surroundings define her ambitions. From her early days, Linda knew she wanted to be involved in healthcare. Starting as a nurse, she worked tirelessly, often putting in long hours while studying to further her career. Eventually, her hard work paid off as she climbed the ranks, earning her place as a respected medical director. Despite her prestigious role, Linda kept herself grounded. To her, leadership wasn't about the title, but about building genuine relationships and understanding the challenges of her team. Linda preferred to work alongside her staff, especially during high-stress situations. Most of her colleagues knew of her accomplishments and respected her deeply for her modesty and hands-on approach. In the grand hospital hallways, with its bustling crowds and top-of-the-line facilities, Linda moved through quietly, without ever hinting at her authority. However, little did Linda know that today would bring a confrontation that would challenge her core beliefs about humility and respect. Linda's hospital was known for its cutting-edge medical technology, state-of-the-art facilities, and high-profile clientele. While the hospital excelled in patient care, it also had a notoriously hierarchical culture. Doctors, especially those who held prestigious positions, were often treated as the elite, with their word almost unquestionable. The lines between doctors and nurses were strictly drawn, and many medical staff adhered to these divisions. As a leader, Linda had been quietly working to shift this culture toward more inclusivity and respect. However, she knew that changing attitudes and dismantling biases in such a rigid environment was a slow and steady task. Among the doctors at the hospital was Dr. Frank Edwards, a middle-aged man who had earned his reputation as an exceptional surgeon. However, along with his medical skills, Dr. Edwards was also known for his condescending attitude. He held nurses and support staff in low regard, rarely acknowledging them as equals and rarely thanking them for their contributions. For Dr. Edwards, respect was a one-way street, and he rarely showed consideration for anyone he deemed as being below him. Today would be the day Linda's path crossed with Dr. Edwards. But neither of them could have anticipated the ripple effect that a simple encounter would create. Linda's journey from a young nurse to the medical director had been filled with countless challenges. Coming from a low-income background meant she had to work twice as hard to overcome the biases she faced early on in her career. She spent her formative years juggling jobs and studying through sleepless nights to put herself through nursing school and later medical school. She took every shift she could, from overnight rotations to weekends, just to build her skills and pay her way through her education. As a black woman in the medical field, Linda had faced her share of prejudice, often dismissed or underestimated by colleagues who judged her based on her appearance rather than her expertise. But these obstacles only fueled her ambition and resilience. She wanted to prove not only to herself but to others that anyone could succeed if they were willing to work for it. She knew she wanted to make a difference on a larger scale. Becoming a nurse was her first step toward this goal, and as she advanced in her career, she focused on one thing: being a compassionate and inclusive leader. Linda's approach to leadership was rooted in empathy. Unlike many of her colleagues who enjoyed exerting authority, Linda believed in leading by example. She prioritized understanding the struggles of every hospital role, believing that compassion and cooperation were at the heart of quality patient care. To her, leadership wasn't about telling people what to do, but about inspiring them to be their best. Her colleagues admired her for this. Linda often spent time with nurses, orderlies, and junior doctors, always ensuring they felt valued and supported. Her willingness to work directly with her team during busy shifts only increased the respect she received from her staff. However, not everyone shared Linda's inclusive vision. The hospital's elite often ignored the support staff, treating them as if they were invisible. This culture of superiority and rigid hierarchy made it challenging for Linda to instill the kind of respect and collaboration she valued. Although Linda's colleagues saw her as someone who could bridge gaps between doctors and nurses, she knew changing a system deeply rooted in elitism would take time and persistence. Then came the day Linda would encounter Dr. Frank Edwards. Known for his sharp medical acumen, Dr. Edwards was also infamous for his disregard toward nurses. He was a man who prided himself on his surgical skills but lacked the humility Linda so deeply valued. For Dr. Edwards, nurses were there to follow orders and fulfill his needs, not to share in decisions or collaborate as equals. Linda had heard complaints about Dr. Edwards' behavior from her nursing team, but her method had always been to address the culture rather than confront individuals. She preferred to lead through example and hoped her influence would gradually bring change. Yet today, she would find herself face to face with a doctor who saw nurses as inferior, a moment that would test her patience and principles in ways she had never expected. The hospital where Linda worked had a distinct atmosphere. It was a place where the latest technology, the best medical equipment, and the most skilled doctors were gathered to serve an exclusive clientele. Patients ranged from prominent business figures to high-profile celebrities, and the hospital prided itself on being an oasis of elite medical care. But this high standard also came with a downside, a culture of hierarchy that many, like Linda, at the heart of this hierarchy was an unspoken rule. Doctors were the decision-makers, and everyone else was there to support them. Nurses, while crucial to patient care, were often seen as subordinate. They were expected to follow orders without question, and few doctors took the time to understand the pressures and challenges nurses faced daily. This attitude was so deeply ingrained in the hospital's culture that even some of the newer staff adopted it, modeling themselves after the more senior doctors. Linda made it her mission to address these biases ever since she became the medical director. She wanted to foster a workplace where respect went both ways, regardless of title or role. But she also knew that true change couldn't happen overnight. The nurses often felt they had to stay in their lane to avoid confrontations with doctors who treated them as disposable. It was exactly this attitude that Linda hoped to dismantle through her own example and leadership. Among those who embodied this toxic hierarchy was Dr. Frank Edwards. Dr. Edwards was a seasoned surgeon, one who had a strong track record with his patients. His skill in the operating room was unquestionable, and he had garnered respect from peers for his expertise. But his interpersonal skills left much to be desired. Known for being dismissive and abrupt, he was the type of doctor who rarely thanked his team and almost never acknowledged nurses by name. Dr. Edwards had become so accustomed to his superiority that he often failed to notice or respect the contributions of those around him. In his mind, nurses were merely there to assist him. They were neither equals nor colleagues. This belief led him to treat them with condescension and impatience, barking orders without even a hint of courtesy. He saw no need for cooperation or collaboration, only obedience. Linda had been aware of Dr. Edwards' reputation for a long time, as complaints about his attitude occasionally reached her desk. But she had always chosen to address these issues through broader initiatives rather than calling out individuals. She believed that addressing the culture as a whole would lead to deeper, long-lasting change. However, today would be different. Today, her decision to fill in as a nurse had placed her directly in Dr. Edwards' path. Linda had no idea that her role in Scrubs would soon make her a target for his unchecked arrogance. She was merely focused on completing her duties, grateful for the chance to reconnect with the day-to-day patient care she had once embraced wholeheartedly. As she reviewed patient charts and ensured all records were in order, she felt a quiet satisfaction, happy to lend a hand where it was needed. But unbeknownst to her, Dr. Edwards had just entered the ward, his eyes scanning the room, ready to assert his dominance over anyone who, in his opinion, wasn't meeting his standards. Dr. Edwards' gaze fell upon Linda, and in an instant he made a snap judgment. He didn't recognize her, and why would he? In his mind, she was just another nurse, someone there to follow his every instruction. A faint irritation rose in him as he assumed she wasn't doing her job efficiently enough for his liking. His expression hardened as he walked over, already preparing to lay down his complaints. But what would follow was an exchange neither Linda nor Dr. Edwards could have anticipated. A clash of perspectives and values that would challenge the very structure of the hospital's hierarchy and become a turning point in both of their careers. As Dr. Frank Edwards approached Linda, irritation was already evident in his expression. To him, she was just another nurse, one who, in his eyes, seemed a little too slow, a little too calm for the fast-paced demands of the ward. He'd barely glanced at her name tag. After all, he didn't care to know the names of most nurses, unless they worked directly under him. With a dismissive frown, he barked out his instructions without even a greeting. "Are you planning to just stand there all day?" he snapped, his voice dripping with impatience. "I need these patient files updated immediately. Do you understand, or is that too complicated?" Linda looked up from the chart she was reviewing, taken aback for a split second by his tone. She hadn't been spoken to like this in years, and certainly not by anyone who didn't know her position. However, she quickly composed herself, giving Dr. Edwards a calm, measured response. "I'm following the standard protocol, Doctor. The files will be updated shortly." But Dr. Edwards wasn't interested in explanations. To him, any response that wasn't immediate compliance felt like insubordination. His face flushed slightly with irritation, and he waved a hand dismissively. "I don't have time for excuses," he shot back, his voice louder this time, drawing the attention of nearby nurses and junior doctors who exchanged uneasy glances. "This hospital is already struggling without staff like you slowing things down. Just do your job." Linda could feel the tension building in the room. She sensed the concerned gazes of her colleagues, who knew her true role, and were quietly shocked to see Dr. Edwards berating her. She took a steadying breath, refusing to let his attitude provoke a reaction. It wasn't that his words hurt her pride. She was used to handling difficult personalities. But the assumptions behind his words stung. He hadn't even given her a chance to explain, immediately assuming she was somehow incompetent or inadequate. "I'm ensuring patient care isn't compromised," Linda replied, her voice still calm and steady. "The files will be ready as needed." But Dr. Edwards wasn't listening. His voice rose further, loud enough that anyone nearby could hear him clearly. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," he said, gesturing toward her with a dismissive wave. "No urgency, no attention to detail. It's no wonder things don't run smoothly around here with staff like this." The weight of his words hung in the air, heavy with accusation and frustration. Linda stood there, still calm but quietly hurt, not by his criticisms, but by the unfounded assumptions he'd made about her based on nothing but a quick judgment. He hadn't considered her qualifications, her background, or her experience. In his eyes, she was just a nurse, someone beneath him. The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. The other nurses and junior doctors in the room were torn, watching the exchange with apprehension. Dr. Edwards had always been this way, but today, his words felt particularly biting. Perhaps it was the authority with which Linda held herself, or the calmness in her eyes as she stood her ground. Linda could have easily revealed her role at that moment. She could have informed Dr. Edwards that she was, in fact, the medical director of the entire hospital, his superior. But she held back. Confronting him in this way would do little to address the larger issue. His attitude wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a symptom of the deeper cultural problem within the hospital, an environment where doctors viewed nurses as subordinates rather than colleagues. Exposing her title wouldn't change his mindset, and it certainly wouldn't alter the unspoken biases that allowed behavior like his to go unchecked. So instead, Linda responded with quiet restraint. "I'll make sure everything is handled, doctor," she said firmly, her voice carrying a strength that Dr. Edwards was too preoccupied to notice. He muttered something under his breath, perhaps a good, and stormed off, leaving a palpable tension in the room. Linda watched him go, feeling a mixture of sadness and resolve. She hadn't expected to be treated this way, but she knew she had an opportunity to turn this situation into something constructive. As she turned back to her tasks, Linda noticed the eyes of her colleagues on her. This time, their gazes were different. There was a respect, a quiet admiration for how she had handled herself. Dr. Edwards may have attempted to humiliate her, but Linda had maintained her dignity, showing that true strength came not from titles, but from character. After Dr. Edwards stormed off, Linda felt the weight of the moment settle over her. She knew the sting of his words wasn't hers alone. It resonated with everyone in the room who had ever been disregarded or demeaned. She had always believed in addressing the hospital's cultural issues as a whole, rather than pointing fingers at individuals, but today's incident left her feeling unsettled. Returning to her office after her shift, Linda finally allowed herself a moment to process what had happened. Sitting at her desk, she replayed Dr. Edwards' words in her mind, the dismissive tone, the assumptions he'd made about her ability and worth. This wasn't the first time she'd encountered such treatment in her career, but it had been a long time since she'd felt this kind of blatant disrespect. As she thought about it, her frustration grew. She had worked so hard to create a hospital culture rooted in respect and understanding, yet the behavior she'd witnessed today felt like a step backward. She couldn't shake the feeling that Dr. Edwards' words reflected an attitude she'd been fighting against for years. That certain people were more deserving of respect and authority simply because of their title or perceived status. In this case, it was an assumption based not only on her nursing scrubs, but perhaps even on her race and gender. Still, she knew she had to be strategic. This wasn't just about one interaction, it was about ensuring that no other staff member would have to endure similar treatment. Linda wanted meaningful change, not revenge or a personal apology. She wanted Dr. Edwards and others like him to recognize that every role in the hospital was valuable, that every person deserved respect. Deciding she needed support, Linda reached out to her close friend and fellow hospital director, Carla, someone she could trust to give an honest perspective. Within minutes of sending a message, her phone buzzed with Carla's incoming call. "Linda, are you okay? You sounded upset in your text." Carla's concerned voice filled the line. Linda hesitated, then recounted the incident in full detail. She described Dr. Edwards' harsh words, the way he had belittled her, and the looks of discomfort on the faces of the other nurses and junior doctors in the room. He didn't see me as capable," Linda said, her voice laced with frustration. "To him, I was just someone slowing down his work, and even though I was following the correct protocols, he never gave me the chance to explain." Carla let out a sigh on the other end. "That sounds exactly like Dr. Edwards. He's always been that way, hasn't he? Quick to assume, quick to dismiss. But it doesn't mean it's acceptable. Especially not from someone in his position." Linda nodded, though Carla couldn't see her. "I know. And I've been dealing with these things for years, Carla. This kind of behavior isn't new, but it's exhausting. No one should have to put up with it. Not me, not any of the staff." "You're right," Carla agreed. "And the fact that it was you he treated this way makes it even worse. If he'd taken a moment to understand who he was speaking to, maybe he would have thought twice, but it shouldn't even matter. Respect should be universal, regardless of someone's position." Linda felt a surge of relief as Carla validated her feelings. Sometimes all she needed was someone who understood and shared her perspective. Yet she knew mere validation wouldn't solve the problem at hand. After hanging up, Linda sat in silence for a while, gathering her thoughts and thinking carefully about her next steps. She realized that addressing Dr. Edwards' behavior would require a balanced approach. With a new resolve, Linda opened her laptop and began drafting a report. She wasn't going to write about every detail of her confrontation with Dr. Edwards. Instead, she would use this as an opportunity to address the broader issues in the hospital. Her report would focus on the need for cultural reform, for programs that encouraged respect, empathy, and communication across all levels of staff. Linda knew she couldn't force a change overnight, but perhaps this could be the start of a shift in mindset. As Linda prepared her report, news of the confrontation with Dr. Edwards had already started circulating through the hospital's grapevine. The nurses who had witnessed the exchange couldn't help but talk about it, sharing the story in hushed conversations in the break room and corridors. For many, it was shocking to see Dr. Edwards, a man known for his arrogance, confront someone as respected as Linda, even if he didn't know her true position. "Did you see the way he talked down to her?" one nurse whispered to her colleague. "Like she was nothing. I was so close to stepping in, but Linda handled it so calmly. I don't know how she managed." Another nurse nodded. "It's because she's got more strength than he could ever understand. If he knew who she really was, he'd probably be embarrassed. She's the medical director, for heaven's sake, and he spoke to her like that." The younger nurses exchanged glances, surprised and confused. Most of them had no idea about Linda's actual role, seeing her that day only as a quiet nurse in scrubs. When a senior nurse confirmed that Linda was indeed the medical director, the room fell into silence. The realization settled heavily. Dr. Edwards had berated his own superior without even knowing it. The story continued to spread, and with each retelling, admiration for Linda's calm composure grew. The staff began to see her as more than just a director. They saw her as a true leader, someone who didn't need to flaunt her title but still commanded immense respect through her actions. Many reflected on how she could have put Dr. Edwards in his place right then and there, revealing her title and making a point. But she hadn't. Instead, she had stood her ground gracefully, and that dignity left a strong impression on everyone who heard the story. Meanwhile, Dr. Edwards remained oblivious to the storm brewing around him. He went about his day as if nothing unusual had happened, confident he had corrected an underperforming staff member. Over coffee with a younger doctor that evening, he even recounted the incident with a smirk. "I had to set one of the nurses straight today," he said, shaking his head with a self-satisfied grin. "She was slowing things down, and I needed her to understand there's no room for mistakes here. Some people just don't get it." The younger doctor, who had recently joined the hospital and knew of Linda's reputation, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He respected Linda and was shocked by Dr. Edwards' casual dismissal of her, even if Dr. Edwards didn't realize her identity. Uncertain of how to respond, he simply muttered, "I'm sure she was just trying to help." But Dr. Edwards waved it off, unwilling to entertain any defense of the nurse he believed was beneath him. As the younger doctor left their conversation, he felt a growing discomfort. He was new to the hospital, but he had already heard about Linda's efforts to foster a respectful, inclusive culture. Her example had influenced him, and he now found himself questioning Dr. Edwards' outdated elitist mindset. It wasn't lost on him that Dr. Edwards had assumed this nurse couldn't be his equal, when in fact, she was his superior. Back in her office, Linda finished her report with a sense of calm purpose. She knew she was about to bring these issues to the forefront in a way the hospital couldn't ignore. Her focus was not on exposing Dr. Edwards, but rather on ensuring that no staff member, regardless of their position, would ever have to endure such treatment again. The next day, Linda's report reached the hospital administration. The leadership team was taken aback by the seriousness of the issues she had outlined. They hadn't realized how pervasive these biases had become, or how deeply they affected the morale and efficiency of their staff. Linda's report wasn't just about her encounter with Dr. Edwards. It highlighted a systemic issue in the hospital's culture that required immediate attention. After reading her proposal, the hospital's senior management knew they couldn't ignore it. Within hours, a formal meeting was arranged. Everyone important was called in. department heads, senior doctors, and other key members of the hospital's administrative team. Dr. Edwards, too, was on the list. To him, it seemed like just another routine meeting, and he walked in with his usual air of confidence, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. Linda arrived at the boardroom a few minutes early, taking a quiet moment to center herself. She knew this meeting would be challenging. She didn't relish the idea of confronting Dr. Edwards, but she was determined to address the broader issues that allowed his attitude to go unchecked. This wasn't about personal revenge. It was about fostering a culture where everyone felt valued, and where respect was given regardless of job titles or appearances. As the boardroom filled up, Linda felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her, but she remained composed. This was her chance to enact meaningful change, not only for herself, but for every nurse, orderly, and junior doctor who'd ever felt marginalized. When Dr. Edwards entered the room, he barely glanced at her, taking a seat across the table with the same dismissive confidence he'd displayed in the ward the previous day. Mr. Thompson, the head of hospital management, opened the meeting with a serious tone. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. We have some important matters to address today, specifically regarding an incident involving Dr. Edwards and one of our staff members." Dr. Edwards straightened, already assuming the meeting would validate his actions. He leaned forward, ready to defend himself if needed. "Look, I was only doing my job," he began, his tone already carrying a hint of frustration. "It's crucial we keep things running smoothly, especially with some of the staff who seem to struggle with basic protocols." The senior management remained silent, glancing at Linda before addressing him. Mr. Thompson continued, "Dr. Edwards, this isn't simply about protocol. This meeting is about the way we treat our colleagues, particularly those in positions you might not fully understand." Dr. Edwards frowned, sensing the atmosphere shift, but still unaware of the full extent of what he was walking into. He tried to brush it off. "I have high standards, and I expect others to meet them. I can't compromise patient care just to spare someone's feelings." Mr. Thompson gave him a stern look. "We understand the need for high standards, Dr. Edwards, but that day you made a series of assumptions about someone's abilities and worth without knowing the full picture." Linda listened as Mr. Thompson spoke, her expression calm, though she could feel Dr. Edwards' frustration building. She hadn't spoken yet, but she could see that he still didn't understand the gravity of the situation. Taking a steadying breath, she finally addressed the room. "Dr. Edwards," she began, her voice firm yet composed, "I understand the importance of efficiency in patient care, but what happened that day was not about ensuring patient safety. It was about a lack of respect." Dr. Edwards shifted uncomfortably, clearly irritated at the insinuation. "With all due respect, I was trying to do what's best for the hospital. If someone isn't capable, I have to step in. We can't afford mistakes here." Linda looked him directly in the eye. "What you didn't know, Dr. Edwards, is that I'm not just any nurse. I'm the medical director of this hospital." The room fell into stunned silence. Dr. Edwards' face drained of color as he processed her words, realizing for the first time the depth of his mistake. He glanced around, seeing the surprised expressions of his colleagues, and his confident facade began to crumble. The weight of Linda's words seemed to echo in the silent room. Dr. Edwards sat frozen, his confidence now shaken. For the first time, he looked at Linda not as a subordinate, but as someone who held authority over him, a person who not only commanded respect, but who could influence the entire hospital's future. He opened his mouth as if to respond, but no words came out. The reality of the situation had finally hit him. He had berated his own superior, publicly, without an ounce of respect. Linda held his gaze steadily, her expression calm but unwavering. She wasn't here to humiliate him, but to make him and everyone else in the room understand the impact of unchecked assumptions and biases. After a moment, she continued, "In the healthcare field, each of us plays a critical role, whether we are doctors, nurses, or support staff. And the respect we give one another directly impacts the quality of care we provide our patients. This isn't just about one moment. It's about the culture we allow to exist here." Dr. Edwards' face flushed, a mixture of embarrassment and unease washing over him. He hadn't thought twice about his actions that day, assuming he had every right to correct what he believed was underperformance. But now, in the light of Linda's revelation, he saw his actions differently. It wasn't just a misjudgment about a nurse's capabilities. It was a demonstration of a mindset that had long taken root in his behavior. Linda didn't let up, but her tone remained steady and professional. "Dr. Edwards, you didn't question my competence because of a mistake I made or an error in judgment. You assumed I was less capable simply because I was wearing scrubs and performing a nursing role. And while it may seem minor to some, this assumption highlights a deeper problem. It reveals a bias that affects how we view and treat each other in this hospital." The other members of the management team exchanged glances, clearly aware of the broader implications. Linda's words struck a chord, and they began to understand the importance of her message. This wasn't just about one doctor's attitude. It was about an entire system of behavior and hierarchy that needed to change. Mr. Thompson, sensing the gravity of the situation, turned to Dr. Edwards. "Dr. Edwards, this isn't just a misunderstanding. This is about respect and professionalism, values that are essential to the hospital's mission." Dr. Edwards, visibly uncomfortable, finally found his voice. I didn't realize," he stammered, his words slow and uncertain. "I didn't mean to." Linda cut him off gently but firmly. "That's exactly the problem, Dr. Edwards. You didn't take a moment to see beyond your assumptions. None of us should have to constantly prove our worth just to be treated with basic respect." She paused, letting her words sink in. "It's time we address the biases that prevent this hospital from being the inclusive, respectful place we all want it to be." Dr. Edwards looked around, his usual bravado replaced by a visible discomfort. He could see from the expressions of his colleagues that they agreed with Linda's perspective. For the first time, he felt the full impact of his actions, not just on Linda, but on the hospital's environment as a whole. In a quiet voice, he said, "I understand. I'm sorry, Dr. Brooks. I mean, Director Brooks." His apology was halting, but genuine, the realization of his mistake weighing heavily on him. Linda nodded slightly, accepting his apology, but not dwelling on it. She knew this moment wasn't about personal vindication. It was about creating a turning point. She addressed the room, her voice strong and clear. "This isn't just about me. This is about ensuring that every member of our staff feels valued, respected, and empowered to do their best work. We need to be a hospital that recognizes the worth of every role, no matter what uniform we wear." The management team listened attentively, and Mr. Thompson nodded, stepping forward to close the meeting. "Dr. Brooks is absolutely right," he said. "Starting today, we'll be implementing new training initiatives focused on respect, inclusion, and communication. Every member of the hospital will participate, from top-ranking doctors to support staff. We're committed to building a culture that aligns with our core values." As the meeting ended, Dr. Edwards lingered in his seat, clearly grappling with the weight of what had just transpired. His demeanor was subdued, his usual confidence shaken to its core. He watched Linda as she quietly gathered her things, still carrying herself with the same quiet dignity she had shown in the ward. And for the first time, he truly understood the impact of his actions. In the days following the meeting, the hospital started to feel the beginnings of change. Management quickly moved to implement the training initiatives announced by Mr. Thompson. Diversity and inclusion sessions were scheduled for everyone on staff, from senior doctors to custodial teams. These sessions weren't just a formality. They aimed to confront and address biases head-on, teaching staff to recognize and challenge assumptions they might have held unconsciously. Linda remained actively involved in shaping these programs. She met with the training team to ensure the sessions covered topics beyond just surface-level courtesy. She wanted these conversations to address the deeper issues, such as the dynamics of power, the role of empathy in healthcare, and the biases that often go unnoticed. Linda knew that real change required honesty and vulnerability from everyone involved. As word of the training spread, the atmosphere in the hospital began to shift. People who had heard of Linda's encounter with Dr. Edwards were reminded of the importance of these changes. Many staff members, especially nurses, felt a renewed sense of respect for Linda, seeing her as a leader who not only spoke about change but actively worked to make it happen. She had become a symbol of resilience and grace under pressure, inspiring others to reflect on their own actions and attitudes. Dr. Edwards, on the other hand, found himself at the center of attention in a way he hadn't anticipated. His initial embarrassment had given way to a quiet reflection, and the consequences of his actions were becoming increasingly clear to him. The humbling experience of learning Linda's true position had forced him to confront aspects of his behavior that he had ignored for years. He couldn't escape the whispers and the sideways glances from staff members who had heard about the incident. In the past, Dr. Edwards might have brushed off any criticism, but now he found himself reflecting deeply on the message Linda had delivered. He realized that he had always assumed his authority and skills as a surgeon set him apart, making him somehow better than the nurses and support staff. Now, he was forced to recognize that these beliefs had been not only unfair, but harmful. Dr. Edwards began attending the training sessions, initially out of obligation, but soon with genuine intent. He found himself listening more closely than he ever had before, his own biases becoming uncomfortably clear with each session. During one particular session, a facilitator asked everyone to reflect on a time they had made assumptions about someone based solely on their appearance or role. The exercise was simple, but Dr. Edwards found himself grappling with the uncomfortable realization that he had been guilty of this countless times. At one point, he decided to speak up. Taking a deep breath, he shared his experience with Linda, openly admitting his assumptions and the disrespect he had shown her. His voice was shaky, but the sincerity of his words surprised everyone in the room. "I've always believed that my standards were what kept this hospital running," he said quietly. "But I realize now that I've been so focused on maintaining authority that I've lost sight of the respect we owe one another." There was a silence in the room as his colleagues processed his words. For many, it was the first time they had seen Dr. Edwards show vulnerability. His willingness to acknowledge his faults had a profound effect on the staff, who saw a side of him that was usually masked by his arrogance. His admission became a turning point for him and, in many ways, for the hospital as a whole. His vulnerability gave others the courage to examine their own biases and assumptions, creating a ripple effect of self-reflection among the team. For Linda, hearing about Dr. Edwards' transformation was encouraging. She didn't need an apology. She wanted progress. And while she hadn't expected him to change overnight, she hoped his growth was genuine. As Linda continued her work in the hospital, the impact of her encounter with Dr. Edwards began to reach beyond the hospital walls. Word of the changes taking place, especially the diversity and respect training sessions, started spreading to other medical institutions. Colleagues from other hospitals reached out, curious about the reforms Linda was implementing. They wanted to know more about how she had managed to turn a moment of confrontation into a meaningful movement toward respect and inclusivity. Linda received invitations to speak at medical conferences and leadership panels. Though she had never sought the spotlight, she understood that sharing her story could have a positive influence on others. At each event, Linda spoke openly about the importance of fostering an environment of mutual respect in healthcare. She recounted her journey from a young nurse to a medical director and shared how every step of that journey had been shaped by resilience, empathy, and a determination to be seen not only for her role, but for her abilities. In one of her speeches, Linda highlighted the challenges of being a woman of color in a leadership position within a system that often favored established hierarchies. She shared how these experiences had motivated her to work toward a more inclusive workplace. "Healthcare is about healing, and that healing starts with us," she said to a captivated audience. "If we don't respect each other, how can we expect to provide the best care to our patients? It starts with us, breaking down biases, supporting one another, and building a system where everyone, from nurses to surgeons, feels valued." Her message resonated with people from all backgrounds. After each talk, Linda received messages from junior doctors, nurses, and even administrative staff who were inspired by her words. They shared their own experiences of feeling dismissed or overlooked and Linda encouraged them to advocate for themselves and for the change they wanted to see in their workplaces. She had become a symbol of resilience and integrity in the healthcare community, a leader who didn't need a title to command respect, only her actions. Back at the hospital, Linda continued to see positive changes. The respect training had become a regular part of staff development, and conversations around workplace culture had become more open and honest. Nurses and junior doctors reported feeling more valued and empowered to voice their concerns. The staff began to view the hospital not just as a place of employment, but as a community where everyone's contributions mattered. Dr. Edwards, meanwhile, had undergone a transformation that few had anticipated. His vulnerability in the training sessions had opened a door for him to connect with his colleagues in ways he never had before. He started mentoring younger doctors, not only teaching them medical skills, but also sharing his journey of growth and the importance of humility and teamwork. He began to foster a sense of camaraderie with the nurses, taking time to learn their names and ask for their input. It was clear to everyone that he was making a genuine effort to change. One day, Dr. Edwards approached Linda in the hallway. He hesitated, clearly nervous, before speaking. "Dr. Brooks," he began, his tone respectful, "I just wanted to thank you. I know it must not have been easy to handle the situation the way you did, but you've changed the way I see things, and I'm grateful for that." Linda looked at him, sensing the sincerity in his words. She nodded, a gentle smile on her face. "Thank you, Dr. Edwards. I appreciate that," she replied. "The real strength is in acknowledging where we can grow, and I think we all have room for that." At that moment, Linda felt a sense of closure. She hadn't sought this journey, nor had she expected to influence so many, but she realized that each step she'd taken had led to this point. Her commitment to compassion and respect had created a ripple effect, transforming not only her own workplace, but also inspiring change in others. And though there was still much work to be done, Linda felt hopeful for the future. The months that followed Linda and Dr. Edwards' pivotal interaction marked a profound transformation in the hospital's culture. The respect training sessions became an integral part of new staff orientation, ensuring that the next generation of doctors, nurses, and support staff would enter the workforce with an understanding of inclusivity, empathy, and collaboration. It was no longer just about titles and hierarchy. The hospital was fostering a community where people valued one another's skills and contributions. Linda's role evolved as well. She was no longer just a medical director, but a mentor and a leader who had come to represent the very values the hospital was striving to embody. Junior staff often came to her for guidance, seeking advice not just on career growth, but on how to handle challenging interactions and how to build a workplace culture rooted in respect. Linda always had time for these conversations, reminding each staff member that their voice mattered, their role was valuable, and that they were part of something bigger than themselves. In the break rooms, hallways, and conference rooms, conversations had shifted noticeably. Staff began addressing each other with newfound respect, and doctors increasingly recognized the importance of nurses' insights in patient care. Linda often saw colleagues acknowledging the work of others openly, even small acts of gratitude and appreciation becoming part of the daily rhythm. What had once been an environment clouded with a sense of hierarchy was now a place of shared purpose and mutual respect. One particularly meaningful day, Linda received an email from a young nurse who had recently joined the hospital. The nurse expressed her gratitude for the environment Linda had cultivated. She wrote, "I was nervous coming here, having heard stories about how hospitals can be. But for my very first day, I felt respected and included. You don't know how much it means to me. I'm able to focus on my patients because I feel supported. Thank you for creating a place where people like me can thrive." Linda read the message, a warmth spreading through her as she realized the extent of the impact her efforts were making. She remembered the challenges of her early career and the struggles she had faced to be seen as an equal. Knowing that young professionals now felt valued and empowered in her hospital was perhaps the greatest validation of her work. Meanwhile, Dr. Edwards continued his own journey of growth. As he reflected on his past behavior, he recognized the patterns that had shaped him into a person who valued authority over empathy. Determined to make amends, he focused on becoming a doctor who not only healed patients, but also uplifted his colleagues. Over time, he became known for advocating the same values he once ignored, encouraging others to lead with kindness and humility. Linda's influence began extending even further. Inspired by her story, other hospitals reached out, inviting her to help them implement similar changes. She participated in video conferences with hospital leaders across the country, sharing her insights and strategies for creating a respectful and inclusive culture. Some institutions even launched their own respect training programs inspired by Linda's model. Linda's story became one of resilience and transformation, a testament to how one person's strength could inspire an entire institution. And as her impact continued to spread, she realized she had created a legacy, one that would inspire healthcare professionals for years to come. One morning, Linda received an email marked urgent from the National Association of Healthcare Leaders. Curious, she opened it to find an invitation to speak at their annual conference. It was one of the largest gatherings in the healthcare industry, attended by leaders, policymakers, and top medical professionals from across the country. They wanted her to share her story and discuss the reforms she had championed at the hospital, particularly the emphasis on respect, inclusion, and dismantling workplace hierarchy. Linda took a moment to absorb the invitation. She had never imagined herself on such a large stage, speaking to people with the power to shape the future of healthcare on a national level. Yet here she was, invited because her actions had resonated far beyond her hospital. She realized that this was an opportunity not just to tell her story, but to advocate for meaningful systemic changes across the industry. After accepting the invitation, Linda began preparing her speech. She reflected on her own journey, the obstacles she had overcome, and the small but powerful changes that had sparked a cultural shift in her hospital. She didn't want her talk to simply recount the incident with Dr. Edwards. She wanted it to inspire a deeper conversation about respect in healthcare, about treating everyone, from doctors to janitors, as integral members of the medical team. When the day of the conference finally arrived, Linda took the stage in front of hundreds of faces. She felt a familiar mix of nerves and determination, but as she looked out at the audience, she thought of her hospital, her colleagues, and the young nurses who now felt empowered to make their voices heard. Taking a deep breath, she began. "I'm here today because of a simple yet powerful idea. Respect," she started, her voice steady and confident. In healthcare, we speak so often about compassion for our patients. But what about compassion for each other? How can we expect to give the best care if we don't extend that same kindness, respect, and empathy to everyone within our walls? She told her story about her journey from a nurse to a medical director, the biases she had encountered, and the way one encounter with a doctor had ignited a transformative movement. She didn't name Dr. Edwards, but spoke about how deeply embedded biases and assumptions could undermine an institution's values. "It's not enough to simply care for patients," she said. "We have to care for each other. This isn't just a matter of kindness, it's a matter of better patient outcomes, of creating a healthier environment for everyone." The audience listened intently, and as she finished, she saw many nodding in agreement. Linda's words had struck a chord, and as she left the stage, a wave of applause erupted. She felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude and purpose, realizing that this was more than just her story. It was a movement that others were ready to join. After the speech, several leaders approached her, thanking her for her honesty and vision. A few expressed interest in implementing similar reforms at their own hospitals. Linda found herself in deep conversations with people who were inspired to make change, not just in policy, but in the very culture of their institutions. It became clear to Linda that this journey was far from over. There were many more steps to take, more conversations to have, and more people to inspire. She returned to her hospital with a renewed sense of purpose, ready to continue her work and to be a voice for respect, not just in her own institution, but across the healthcare field. After her speech at the conference, Linda found herself at the forefront of a budding movement for respect and inclusivity in healthcare. Leaders from hospitals and medical institutions around the country began reaching out to her for guidance, eager to transform their own cultures in similar ways. Each call and email she received affirmed the same reality. The need for systemic change was widespread, and her story sparked a desire to address it. Linda embraced the role, though she remained grounded in her original mission. She didn't see herself as a crusader, but as a mentor, helping others understand how powerful empathy, respect, and humility could be within a healthcare setting. In the weeks following the conference, she worked with her own hospital's administration to create a toolkit that outlined the steps they had taken to build a culture of respect. It included training modules, feedback loops for staff to voice their concerns safely, and strategies to break down hierarchical barriers within teams. Soon, Linda's toolkit was shared widely. Hospitals across the state and then across the country began adopting its practices. The results were tangible. Staff members at these institutions reported feeling more connected, more valued, and more motivated to provide exceptional care. Patients also noticed the difference. In follow-up surveys, they expressed appreciation for the genuine teamwork they observed among doctors, nurses, and support staff. At her own hospital, Linda saw changes she could hardly believe. Dr. Edwards, who once embodied the old way of thinking, had transformed into one of the most vocal advocates for the new culture. He openly encouraged other senior doctors to participate in training sessions and even led discussions on the importance of humility in leadership. His shift in behavior served as a powerful example, showing others that it was possible and necessary to evolve for the betterment of the whole institution. One evening, Linda sat in her office, reflecting on the journey she had embarked upon. She thought back to that initial confrontation with Dr. Edwards, a moment that had started out as painful and demeaning. What had once been a source of frustration was now a turning point that had reshaped her hospital and was beginning to reshape others as well. The gratitude from the staff and the stories of change she received kept her motivated, even when the work felt daunting. Her family had also felt the impact of her journey. Linda's children were old enough to understand the challenges their mother had faced. They saw her determination to build a better workplace, and Linda's husband often told her how proud he was of her resilience and commitment. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, her eldest daughter turned to her and said, "Mom, you're making history, aren't you?" Linda smiled, touched by her daughter's words. "I don't know about that," she replied gently. "I just hope I'm making things a little better for the people who come after me." In the months that followed, Linda continued to speak at events, meet with healthcare leaders, and advocate for a more inclusive, respectful healthcare environment. She knew there was still work to be done, but with each step forward, the vision she held grew clearer. She was creating a lasting legacy, a movement that would shape healthcare for generations to come. Bookmark. As Linda's influence spread, the ripple effects of her work were felt across the healthcare industry. Hospitals began reporting noticeable improvements, not only in employee satisfaction, but also in patient care outcomes. When staff members felt respected and valued, it showed in their work. Teams collaborated more effectively, communication improved, and conflicts were addressed with empathy rather than hierarchy. This shift was creating a healthcare environment where staff felt safe to bring their whole selves to work, confident that they would be seen and heard. One hospital in particular, across the country from Linda's, had implemented her toolkit with remarkable success. This hospital had long struggled with high turnover rates among nurses and support staff. However, after adopting Linda's approach, they saw retention rates improve as the culture of respect took root. Nurses who had once considered leaving now felt invested in their roles, seeing them as opportunities for growth and service rather than merely tasks to complete. They felt encouraged to participate actively in patient care decisions, and doctors began to see the value in their input, knowing that each team member brought a unique and essential perspective. Linda began to hear more of these success stories, and each one felt like a small victory. She knew how deeply ingrained certain attitudes were in medicine, attitudes that often overlooked the very people whose work kept hospitals running. The more stories she heard, the more committed she became to expanding her mission. Each institution's progress represented not only a shift in culture, but also a step toward more compassionate patient care. Meanwhile, Linda's own hospital had transformed in ways she could only have dreamed of. Conversations between departments became more frequent and collaborative. Doctors sought out nurses' opinions on treatment plans, and the nurses, in turn, felt empowered to share their insights openly. Linda often found herself receiving notes of gratitude from team members who appreciated the changes, noting how much easier and more fulfilling their work felt. She began to notice how her own approach to leadership had inspired others to lead with empathy and openness, creating a workplace where everyone's voice held weight. One day, Linda was approached by a group of junior nurses who thanked her for all she had done. "Because of you, we feel like we belong here," one of them said, her voice filled with sincerity. "We're no longer afraid to speak up. We know that our perspectives matter." Another added, "We used to feel invisible, but now we feel like part of something important." Linda felt a deep sense of fulfillment as she listened to them. This was precisely what she had hoped for. A hospital where people could thrive, not just as professionals, but as individuals with purpose and value. She was witnessing a new generation of healthcare workers who saw themselves as equal partners in patient care. At a hospital-wide meeting later that month, Linda decided to address the staff. She shared stories from other institutions that had reached out to her, showing her team the larger impact of the movement they had helped inspire. "Each of you has contributed to this change," she said warmly. "Your willingness to embrace a culture of respect has created a place where patients benefit from our collaboration and where we all feel proud of the work we do. I want you all to know that your courage and openness have made this possible." The room erupted in applause, and Linda felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She had started with a vision, but it was the entire hospital community's collective effort that had brought it to life. As Linda continued her work, her hospital's transformation became a model for change across the industry. Medical publications picked up on the story, and articles about the respect revolution in healthcare began circulating widely. Linda's name appeared in articles discussing leadership that fosters inclusivity, and she was even featured in a prominent magazine's cover story, titled "The Heart of Healthcare: How One Leader Changed the Way We Work Together." For Linda, these recognitions were both humbling and validating, but they also reminded her of how far the industry still had to go. The work was never truly finished. There would always be new challenges and biases to address and new hierarchies to break down. She remained committed to pushing forward, not for personal recognition, but because she believed deeply that respect and empathy could transform the entire field of healthcare. One day, she received an invitation from a prestigious medical school to help design a new curriculum. They wanted her to create a course that would teach medical students about the importance of respect and collaboration across all roles within a hospital. Linda was thrilled. She had always believed that change had to start early, and instilling these values in future doctors could ensure that the next generation entered the field with a mindset of inclusivity and teamwork. The course she designed was interactive and discussion-based, encouraging students to engage in honest conversations about bias, hierarchy, and respect. She introduced real-life case studies, including stories from her own career, and invited nurses, administrative staff, and even custodial staff as guest speakers to share their perspectives on what respect and teamwork looked like to them. The course quickly gained popularity, and students appreciated the chance to explore these topics in depth, recognizing that they would soon be part of a healthcare system that could either support or stifle growth, depending on how they approached their work. As the years went by, Linda's influence continued to grow, but she remained deeply connected to her roots at the hospital. Her commitment never wavered. She was there day after day, mentoring, listening, and working alongside her team. Dr. Edwards, now a close colleague and ally, often joined her in these efforts. He had become a symbol of the possibility for personal growth and transformation, sharing his own journey in the diversity training sessions and openly discussing how his initial biases had hindered him. Together, he and Linda became powerful advocates for a culture of continuous learning and respect. One afternoon, Linda received an unexpected visit from Dr. Edwards. He looked both nervous and excited, an unusual combination for the once stoic surgeon. "Linda," he began, his voice uncharacteristically soft, "I wanted to thank you. You didn't just help me see things differently. You helped me become a better person. And because of that, I want to do something meaningful." He went on to explain that he wanted to establish a scholarship in Linda's name for aspiring nurses and medical students from underserved communities. The scholarship would support students who demonstrated leadership, empathy, and a commitment to respectful, inclusive healthcare. Linda was deeply touched, her eyes welling up as she listened to his plans. The scholarship felt like the perfect way to honor the journey they had both been on. A journey that had changed not just their lives, but countless others. Years later, Linda looked back on her career with pride and humility. What had started as one painful, demeaning incident had blossomed into a lifetime of change and a legacy that would inspire generations. Her hospital, once divided by hierarchy, now thrived as a community. Nurses, doctors, and staff of all roles worked side by side, united by a shared mission of compassionate care. Linda's story continued to spread, reminding people in healthcare and beyond that true leadership was about respect, empathy, and the courage to stand up for what was right. And in the end, Linda knew that her legacy wasn't in awards or articles. It was in the people she'd inspired, the patients who'd received better care, and the students who now entered the healthcare field with hearts full of empathy and minds committed to respect. Linda's journey had reached a fulfilling close, but her impact would carry on for generations. Looking back, she saw how a single moment of disrespect had sparked a lifetime of change. By choosing empathy and integrity over anger, Linda transformed her hospital into a model of inclusivity and respect. Nurses and doctors alike now understood the power of humility, and future generations of healthcare professionals would enter the field inspired to create workplaces where every voice mattered. Years later, Linda continued to hear stories about the scholarship named in her honor and the students who carried her mission forward. She felt profound gratitude, knowing that her legacy was helping young professionals rise above challenges, just as she had once done. She had shown that true strength was not found in titles or authority, but in how we lift others up along the way. Linda's story had become a symbol, proof that compassion, courage, and respect could change lives and transform entire communities. Linda's story reminds us all of the power we hold to make a difference. In every workplace and in every profession, we each have a role in fostering an environment of respect. Think about a time when you felt dismissed or overlooked, or when you had the chance to uplift someone else. How did it shape you? If Linda's journey inspired you, share your thoughts in the comments. Would you have handled things the way she did? Comment 1 if you believe in leading through quiet strength, or 2 if you think confronting disrespect head-on is the way to go. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories that remind us of the difference we can make every day. Thank you for watching, and remember, every small act of kindness, every moment of respect, brings us closer to the world we all deserve.